Paul Retro. Today we are going to be talking about blasters, specifically a couple from my collection and a few of the consoles that I grew up with and the ones that I've owned and how they've held up and lasted over time. So let's go ahead and get into it and get it going. So the most famous one of all is the Nintendo Zapper. This was my original one from 1985, still works, and still has a nice trigger feel to it, good clicky noise. It's been great, still works on CRTs and that, and the way that these functioned really didn't change through time. I know they went through a couple of renditions, there's a few different controllers, but as a kid, felt good in the hands. As far as size goes, as an adult, still fits in a hand. Don't really use this one as much as I used to, just because now we have other options. So this is usually hanging up on the shelf, sitting in the back. Same thing with this, still have it actually attached to my shelf mount with the cable lined up. And this is the justifier for the Sega Genesis. This Lethal Enforcers 2 is about the only two games that I ever really played this with. The other one, the Zapper, was always Hogan's Alley or Duck Hunt. Didn't really have many other games that we owned that actually used those. But Lethal Enforcers was the most common one that always used for this. Had a very quiet, clicky trigger. It just didn't really feel as well as the Zapper did. When you're holding on to it, the handle still feels a bit small. Even as an adult, as a kid, it fell in there a little bit better. Again, these still only work on CRTs, a couple of games for it, and I always had a slightly more issues with this than we did with the Zapper. The other one was an answer for the Sega. This has a stock that goes in the back and a little scope thing on top. As a kid, it was really cool because you could add other stuff to it. And this was one of the first light guns that actually you needed to add batteries to the back of it. I don't even really know if I consider this a light gun because there is another box that plugs into the Sega Genesis that this actually connects out to through the IR receiver up top, and much larger lens than what is on the other ones. You had your A, B, and C buttons up front, another trigger, and again, this one, trigger was super squishy. The front buttons are nice and clicky and that, and when you're holding this as a kid, it felt good. As an adult, still feels good in there, especially with the front grip, and this was really the first one to give you kind of that full front grip kind of hold. And you know, they chucked some sights on the top which were totally useless at the time, but this still felt pretty good outside of it actually requiring other batteries to get plugged into. But it was also the first one that was wireless, which was nice because you didn't have the cable running across, so you didn't need to worry about your dog, cats, or your brother running across the thing and ripping the thing off the wall. There was a 6-in-1 game that this came with as well, and that was really the only one that we ever used this for. And it was kind of fun. I remember playing it a lot, but didn't really use it as much. Out of every one that I have, the one for my Sega Saturn was actually the one I used the most. Lots of Virtua Cop 2, Time Crisis, and a couple other games on there. Had the start button on the side. Had the start button on the side. This one had, again, Sega really liked their clicky triggers on the ones they made. So for the Sega Saturn, and out of all of them, this one was the one that felt the best, either left or right-handed. I mean, all of these are left or right-handed. just off their construction, but this one they actually gave you a nice finger well on the side because the grip was a little bit chunkier than a lot of the other ones. As a kid, it still felt really good. hand as an adult. It did too. Trigger feel is still great. Used the heck out of this one back in the day, and I think between all of these, this one was still my favorite. This brings me to the Sinden light gun, which actually isn't a light gun at all. And as you can see, as far as profile goes, I'm not totally sure what they modeled it off after, outside of it's pretty close to the Saturn. And this one, you have your selectable buttons on either side. There's a D-pad. These come in multiple colors. I know they're on back order for years. I've had mine for a couple of years, just a USB cable out to a TV or into a computer, and then I use that out to the TV. And this is actually how I play a lot of the light gun games, because it uses a camera in the front. It does have its flaws of the speed at which the camera operates and everything, but they give you a nice reload thing on the bottom. I didn't get the recoil pack in mine, but this one has been fairly nice, fairly good to use. It's really quirky to get set up. Doesn't work with every single emulator out there. Shouldn't say it doesn't work, but the setup can be a little clunky depending on the emulator you're trying to use. Out of all of them, this was the most expensive one that I have. This one came with the Nintendo itself. The Justifier, this came with Lethal Enforcers 2. I think back then you paid $40 and you got the blaster and the game itself. Same thing with this. I got this with Virtual Cop for my Sega Saturn for $20. And then this came with the game and that on the Sega, and I think back then it was about $60 for this. This one was this one was $100 and something that I paid for the Sinden, and it took about 3 months for me to get it, and it honestly was about another 9 to 10 months by the time I got it before I even plugged it in to try and use it. The entire thing is a 3D printed shell, but it's sanded and done very nicely. Until some better options come out for the versatility of this, I think this is one of the better ones. I'm not going to say it is the best, but it is definitely one of the better ones if you want to get into light gun games, and you don't want to have to go the CRT route. This is one of the better options, even with the slightly clunkier setup. So check them out, and maybe you'll get yours a little bit faster, because their orders are going out a lot better than what they were back in the day. But that is my light gun collection, at least a couple of them that I have. Mostly Sega. I grew up in a Sega household, aside from the original Nintendo, and then later on the Nintendo 64. It was the Sega, the Saturn, and the Dreamcast is what we had, and then the original Xbox. My neighbors had PlayStations, and then I got a PlayStation later on once the PS2 was out, because they were getting rid of theirs. Like I said, it's a couple of the light guns that I have in my collection, how much I actually like them and that. And honestly, if you want to get into them, these are just a few of my recommendations of places to start with. Honestly, the Justifier, if you can find it and you really want it, I would go that route. Otherwise, it would be actually my last choice of everything sitting on this table, even against the Mancer, and that requiring its own batteries and having its own quirks with the extra IR box that has to get plugged into the Genesis for that to work. But Sinden would definitely be the one if you don't want to go the route, like I said before, of needing to buy a CRT, things like that. If you already got a computer, got it attached to a TV, you want to check out some of the old light gun games, definitely check them out and go that route for those. But we are North Pole Retro. Thanks for stopping in. Check us out at northpoleretro.com. Like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you in the next one.